This video will contain minor spoilers for virtually the entire Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. Viewer discretion is advised. Sonic the Hedgehog is a franchise known for many things, whether it be its competition and eventual loss to Mario, its many shows and comics and even movies, its rough transition to 3D, some really bad games, or what we're going to talk about today, which is that it has a comically high amount of characters. From the games to the shows to especially the comics, Sonic the Hedgehog has acquired a countless number of friends, foes, and everything in between over the years. The question, though, is whether or not it has too many characters, a question which we will try to explore and answer in this video. However, in order to do that, I think we should first look at some of the characters in the franchise. Sonic the Hedgehog was released in 1991 for the Sega Genesis to compete with Nintendo's popular video game character and attached franchise, Mario. This game only introduced two characters, that being Sonic himself and Dr. Robotnik, also known as Dr. Eggman. Technically, this would also include a number of small animals that do have names, but those aren't usually fully fledged characters, so including them in the lineup feels kind of weird, but you can count them if you want to. Anyways, these two characters, Sonic and Eggman, would go on to be the center focus of most Sonic media. Obviously, there are some spin-offs and whatnot that don't include one or the other or both, but this is the heart of Sonic in terms of characters. Sonic versus Eggman. Nature versus machinery. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 would introduce Miles Prower, more commonly known as Tails, who is Sonic's best friend and oftentimes the brain of the group later down the line. Sonic CD would introduce Metal Sonic, one of several robot copies of Sonic, but the most notable throughout the franchise as a whole, as he would continue to show up in later games and external media like the OVA movie.
So now we can get down to the real fight. The last Sonic standing will be the winner. What? This world isn't big enough for both of us and one of us has to go?
Sonic 2 also included a robot Sonic as a boss, though this one had very little bearing on the franchise. Sonic CD also introduced Amy Rose, a pink hedgehog who was introduced more or less as just a love interest to Sonic, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles would introduce Knuckles, the echidna, as well as another robot Sonic with very little bearing on the franchise. So, ignoring all badniks, animals, and unimportant Sonic clones and bosses, we have a total of 6 characters to come from the original Genesis games, those being Sonic, Eggman, Tails, Knuckles, Metal Sonic, and Amy. Around this same time, you'd also see a few characters from the Game Gear games, but the only one of any real importance would be Fang the Sniper, also known as Knack the Weasel, even though he's a Jerboa, also known as Fang the Hunter, who originated in Sonic Triple Trouble. These 7 characters would all star in the Sonic racing game Sonic Drift 2, and already some may feel that this franchise has become a bit bloated, but this amount of characters for a racing game is nothing to write home about, especially if you look at character rosters in similar games from other franchises. Mario Kart is a good example. However, it would not stop at just these 7 characters. Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, a Japanese-only arcade game that is hard to emulate due to its use of a trackball system, would introduce Ray the Flying Squirrel and Mighty the Armadillo. Knuckles Chaotix, a shitty game for the 32X, which was a late add-on for the Sega Genesis, would introduce Espio the Chameleon, Charmy Bee, and Vector the Crocodile, so on and so forth. I don't have the time nor the brain power to literally get into every Sonic character ever created, but the Archie comics would introduce an ungodly number of characters, including Sally Acorn, who served as another love interest to Sonic. Sonic the Fighters would introduce Bark the Polar Bear and Bean the Dynamite, as well as Honey the Cat, though she was more of a secret character. Sonic R would have have the Tails doll and Metal Knuckles as unlockable characters. All in all, the Sonic character roster was pretty robust even before it made the full switch to 3D in its main line of games with Sonic Adventure, and it would only get crazier from there. I don't want to spend this whole video just explaining the origins of characters, but just to run through a few more to make my point, with this new era we would get characters like Shadow the Hedgehog, Big the Cat and his pet Froggy, Rouge the Bat, Silver the Hedgehog, E123 Gamma, Blaze the Cat, Mephiles the Dark, Chip, Infinite, and countless more. And this doesn't even touch the current comic series, the IDW comics, which would introduce even more characters, such as Tangle and Whisper, or there's also any of the characters from the various shows, or the humans in the live-action movies, or any of the alternate universe variants of characters in Sonic Prime, or anyone from the many spin-off games, or even more characters from the mainline games. I think by now you should get the point down and solid. Sonic the Hedgehog has a lot of characters. No one can deny that much. But this brings us back to the question at the top. Does Sonic have too many characters? Well, let's look at both arguments. One could argue that the large roster of characters can be overwhelming to newcomers who are only now getting into the franchise and its fandom. The high amount of characters to keep track of may feel messy in some stories and hard to follow. A lot of the characters have similar designs, especially when you have multiple of the same species, and this can be confusing to some. It also leads to more mindless games in the franchise, like Sonic Dash, which banks a lot on different characters that hardly enhance the game in any way, but urges Sonic fans to spend hours and real money to unlock, just so they can play as their super obscure favorite character for once. But on the flip side, one can argue that the large roster of characters makes the world of Sonic feel more rich and full. There's something for everyone, and you will likely be able to find a character of your favorite animal. Riders for Sonic aren't limited to a small, overdone roster if they don't want to be, as they have many options of interesting characters to use for their stories. Additionally, a lot of the shows and games don't actually utilize that many of the franchise's characters, so it's not typically a huge learning curve up front. The truth of the matter is that there's no objective answer to this question, as it all depends on personal preference and the specific iteration of Sonic that you're looking at. Personally, as an autistic person who on and off hyperfixates on the franchise, I like how many Sonic characters there are, because it gives me a nearly endless well of new information that I can learn and characters I can analyze. But that's just me. So, I close with the following questions. First, for fun, who is your favorite Sonic character? And, finally and most relevant to the topic at hand, do you think that Sonic has too many characters? Let me know in the comments. Stay safe, stay hydrated, goodbye.